He called her his greatest mistake in a courtroom filled with whispers. To Damon Wells, his wife Talia was a quiet, plain librarian. He was eager to discard for a flashier model. He took the house, the savings, and her dignity, leaving her with nothing but a pittance and the clothes on her back. She said nothing, her silence, a deep, unnerving calm that he mistook for surrender. But what Damon in the world didn't know was that her silence was not weakness. It was a promise to a dying kingmaker. And on the day the world learned her real name, every scornful laugh would curdle into horrified disbelief. This is the story of how a woman's silence became the loudest sound in the world. The conference room at Harding Finch in Abernathy was designed to communicate power through suffocation. The mahogany table was a dark, polished lake, reflecting the strained faces around it. The air, thick with the scent of old leather and expensive cologne, felt heavy in Talia Monroe's lungs. Across from her, Damon Wells, her husband of 10 years, was not looking at her. His focus was entirely on the woman beside him, Victoria Vance. Victoria, with her sharp blazer and a smile that never quite reached her predatory eyes, was Damon's new life, his future, his partner in both business and, for the last 18 months, his bed. Talia was the past, an inconvenient footnote he was diligently erasing. "So, we are in agreement," said Damon's lawyer, a man named Gregory Finch, whose voice was as smooth and cold as the marble in the lobby. He slid a document across the table. "Mrs. Wells, soon to be Ms. Monroe again, relinquishes all claims to the marital home in Chestnut Hill. All stocks and bonds held in the Wells Advance Capital Portfolio and the art collection. In return, Mr. Wells agrees to a one-time alimony payment of $50,000. $50,000. It was a pittance, an insult dressed up as a settlement. 10 years of her life, of supporting him when he was a struggling analyst, of editing his business proposals, late into the night of managing their home and social life. So he could focus entirely on his meteoric rise, was being valued at less than the cost of the custom Italian suits he now wore. The house alone was worth over $3 million. His portfolio, which she had helped him build by identifying early-stage tech companies from her meticulous research, was worth 8 figures. Talia looked at the paper. The black ink was stark against the creamy white. She felt a tremor in her hand and placed it in her lap, clenching it into a fist to still it. Her own lawyer, a kind but overwhelmed public defender named Sarah, had told her it was a travesty. "We can fight this, Talia," she'd urged. "We can subpoena his records. We can prove marital contribution. This is a deliberate, malicious attempt to leave you destitute." But Talia had been resolute. "No," she had said, her voice quiet but firm. "I just want it to be over. I'll sign now." In the suffocating silence of the room, all eyes were on her. Damon finally deigned to look at her, his expression a carefully curated mask of weary impatience. It was the look of a man inconvenienced by a minor bureaucratic task, like waiting in line at the DMV. "Talia," he prompted, a slight edge to his voice. "We don't have all day. Victoria and I have a flight to Aspen." Victoria placed a perfectly manicured hand on Damon's arm, her diamond bracelet catching the light. "Darling, be patient," she cooed, though her eyes on Talia were chips of ice. It must be a lot for her to process. Losing all of this. The condescension was a physical blow. Victoria was everything Talia was not. She was loud where Talia was quiet, brazen where Talia was reserved, and her ambition was a weapon she wielded without apology. She was a partner who could sit on boards, who could charm investors who looked perfect on the cover of Boston Finance Monthly. Talia, with her love for dusty old books and quiet evenings, had become a liability to the Damon Wells brand. Talia picked up the pen. It felt impossibly heavy. She thought of the first time Damon had held her hand, his palm warm and calloused from the days when he was still building their IKEA furniture himself. He had promised her the world. He was in a way delivering on that promise. He was keeping the world and giving her a $50,000 shove out the door. Her silence was confounding them. She knew it. They had expected tears, hysterics, pleading. They had prepared for a fight, relishing the chance to crush her. Her quiet acquiescence was an anticlimax, and it unnerved them. They couldn't understand that her silence wasn't about them. It was about a different promise, a different weight she carried. A phone call she had received 3 weeks ago from a number she hadn't seen in 20 years. A weak, raspy voice on the other end. A voice that had once BM'd with authority. "Talia, my girl, it's time. Just hold on. Don't let that boy break you. Not yet." She drew the pen across the signature line. Her name, Talia Monroe, appeared the final act of severing her connection to Talia Wells. She slid the document back across the table. She didn't look at Damon. She couldn't. If she did, she might see a ghost of the man she had loved, and that would break her. "It's done," she said, her voice a low murmur. Gregory Finch nodded, snatching the papers. "Excellent. The funds will be transferred within 48 hours. Damon stood up, straightening his tie. He was already moving on. "Good," he said briskly. He looked down at Talia, a flicker of something. Was it pity or just final dismissive contempt in his eyes? "I do wish you the best, Talia. I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for." It was a hollow platitude, a final twist of the knife. Victoria stood and elegantly slipped her arm through his. "Yes, all the best," she said, her smile, a triumphant slash of red lipstick. "Perhaps you could take a class, pottery or something." Talia finally raised her head and met Victoria's gaze. She didn't say a word. She simply held her stare, her pale blue eyes clear and steady. There was no hatred in them, no anger, just a profound, quiet emptiness that was more unsettling than any curse. For a split second, Victoria's composure wavered. She saw something in Talia's silence she couldn't categorize, a depth she couldn't fathom, and it made her uneasy. Then Damon was guiding her out, his laughter echoing in the hallway as he spoke to Finch about the ski conditions in Aspen. They were gone. Sarah, her lawyer, let out a long, frustrated sigh. "Talia, I still don't understand. You let him strip you bare. He made his fortune with your support." Talia finally let her shoulders slump. The strength that had held her together for the past hour began to fray. "Some things, Sarah," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "are not worth fighting for." As she walked out of the opulent law office and onto the bustling Boston street, the city felt alien. It was the city where she had built a life, and that life had just been legally dismantled and handed to someone else. She had 48 hours until $50,000 landed in her bank account. After that, she would have to find a new apartment, a new life, a new identity. She was no longer Mrs. Wells, the wife of a finance magnate. She was just Talia Monroe, a librarian with a broken heart and a carefully guarded secret. As a cold gust of wind whipped around the corner, she pulled her simple cloth coat tighter. Damon and Victoria were flying to Aspen. She was taking the subway back to a small temporary room she had rented. And yet, she had a strange, unshakable feeling that she was the one who was truly free. The one-bedroom apartment Talia found was in a part of the city Damon would have sneeringly called up and coming, which was his code for unacceptable. It was on the 3rd floor of a brick walk-up with windows that overlooked a bustling street market instead of a manicured lawn. The floors creaked, The radiator hissed like an angry snake, and the kitchen was a cramped alcove. To Damon it would have been a prison. To Talia, it was a sanctuary. Here, there were no ghosts of a shared life. No phantom scent of Damon's cologne in the closet, no indentation of his body on the mattress. She filled the space not with expensive art, but with books. Stacks of them rose from the floor like literary skyscrapers. They were her friends, her solace, her escape. Her job at the Boston AAM, one of the oldest independent libraries in the United States, was her anchor. She wasn't just a librarian. She was a conservator, working in the quiet, climate-controlled basement, tending to rare manuscripts in first editions. Her hands, which Damon had once criticized for not being perfectly manicured, were deft and gentle as they repaired crumbling spines and treated brittle yellowed paper. She found a deep, meditative peace in the process of preservation. While her own life had been torn apart here, she could make things whole again. She was saving stories, giving them a future. Her colleagues knew her as the quiet, unassuming Miss Monroe. They knew she was recently divorced and assumed it had been devastating. They saw the sadness that sometimes clouded her eyes, but they also saw a resilient calm. They didn't ask questions. The world of archives and rare books was a haven for introspective souls, and privacy was a respected currency. Days bled into weeks. Talia established a routine: morning coffee by the window, watching the city wake up, the subway ride to the Arnam, losing herself in a novel, the meticulous focused work of conservation, evenings spent with a simple meal in another book. It was a small life, a quiet one, but it was hers. The $50,000, after paying for the first and last month's rent and buying modest furniture, sat in a savings account, a constant, humiliating reminder of what 10 years of her life had been deemed worth. Sometimes the memories ambushed her. She'd see a man in a grey cashmere coat like the one she'd bought Damon for their 5th anniversary, and her breath would catch. Or she'd smell a particular type of cigar smoke and be transported back to the holiday parties she had once hosted, playing the role of the perfect corporate wife. She remembered the beginning before Wells and Vance Capital, before the ruthless ambition had consumed him. She remembered Damon as a young, hungry analyst, full of dreams and a surprising tenderness. They had met in a dusty corner of a university library. He was researching financial history. She was shelving books. He had been charmingly flustered, knocking over a stack of volumes and apologizing profusely. He had asked her to dinner as an apology, and their love story had begun between the shelves, surrounded by the scent of old paper and ink. He had loved her intelligence then. He'd called her his secret weapon, praising her ability to absorb and synthesize complex information. It was her research that led him to his first major investment success. He used to say, "You see the patterns no one else does, Talia." But as his success grew, her role shifted. She went from being his partner to his accessory. Her insights were no longer valued, only her ability to host a dinner party and smile placidly at his side. The more his world expanded, the smaller hers became. The man she fell in love with had been slowly buried under layers of wealth, arrogance, and a desperate need for validation from a world she never cared for. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, a month after the divorce was finalized, a certified letter arrived. It wasn't from Damon's lawyers. The letterhead was heavy, embossed with the name Harrison and Shaw, a prestigious law firm based in Newport, Rhode Island. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was it. She slit the envelope with a trembling hand. The language was formal, sterile. Dear Ms. Monroe, this letter is to formally request your presence at the offices of Harrison and Shaw on Monday, October 20th at 10 Uru. for a matter of significant personal importance pertaining to the estate of the late Mr. Alistair Cromwell. Alistair Cromwell, her maternal grandfather, a name that was a legend in the world of industry and a curse in her own family. A man she hadn't seen since she was 8 years old. A man who, according to her late mother, had disowned them for the crime of marrying for love instead of for a corporate merger. He was a titan, a phantom, a figure of immense power and wealth who had been nothing more than a ghost in her life. The letter continued. All travel and accommodation expenses will of course be covered. Please contact my assistant at your earliest convenience to make the necessary arrangements. It was signed by a David Harrison, senior partner. She sank into her worn armchair, the letter clutched in her hand. The weak, raspy voice on the phone echoed in her mind. Talia, my girl, it's time. He had called her just before the divorce proceedings began. He had known he was dying. He had made her promise not to cause a stir, not to fight Damon, not to draw any attention to herself. Let him think he's won, Alistair had rasped. Let him show his true colours. The world needs to see who he is and who you are. Just be patient, my girl. Your silence will be your testimony. At the time, she had thought it was the rambling of a dying, estranged old man. She had agreed out of pity, out of a flicker of ancient familial duty. She had stayed silent during the divorce for him, honouring his bizarre last request, believing it was a final strange test from a man she barely knew. She thought his death would be the end of it. But this letter, this summons, suggested something else, entirely. It suggested that her grandfather's death wasn't an end, but a beginning. And for the first time since she signed those divorce papers, a spark of something other than grief ignited within her. It felt like steel. The drive from Boston to Newport was a journey through a life she might have lived. The city's dense historic landscape slowly gave way to the sprawling coastal estates of Rhode Island, each one a fortress of old money and quiet power. The car, a black Lincoln town car sent by the law firm, was silent and smooth, a world away from her daily subway commute. Talia watched the scenery blur past her window, feeling like a character in a book whose plot was taking an entirely unexpected turn. She was dressed in her best, which was still modest by anyone else's standards. A simple navy blue dress, a string of her mother's pearls, and the same cloth coat she had worn out of Damon's lawyer's office. She felt like an imposter, a librarian summoned to a palace. The driver, a stoic man named Charles, navigated the winding roads of Newport with practiced ease. They passed the famous Gilded Age mansions, the Breakers' Marble House monuments, to the colossal fortunes of America's industrial barons. Talia knew from her mother's hushed, bitter stories that the Cromwell estate known as Seacliff rivaled them all, but was far more private, hidden from the tourist maps and prying eyes. As they turned off the main road and passed through a pair of immense wrought-iron gates bearing a stately sea, a sense of vertigo washed over her. A long, crunching gravel driveway snaked through a landscape of impossibly green lawns and ancient weeping beech trees. The air grew still heavy with the scent of salt and money. And then Seacliff came into view. It wasn't just a house, it was a declaration, a sprawling stone manor of granite and limestone with dozens of windows staring out at the Atlantic like impassive eyes. It was both beautiful and intimidating, a place built to withstand not just the ocean storms, but the storms of time and fortune. This was the world her mother had run from. This was the kingdom of Alistair Cromwell. The car stopped, not at the mansion, but at a smaller, though still imposing stone building, Set to the side the law offices of Harrison and Shaw. It seemed even Alistair Cromwell preferred to keep business at a slight remove from his home. Charles opened the door for her. "Mr. Harrison is expecting you, Miss Munro." Her legs felt unsteady as she walked up the stone steps. The door was open before she could touch it by a young woman in a crisp suit. "Miss Munro, welcome. Mr. Harrison will see you now." She was led through a hushed, wood-panelled lobby into a large corner office. The room was lined with leather-bound law books from floor to ceiling, and a large window offered a panoramic view of the cliffs and the churning grey ocean below. Behind a massive oak desk sat a man who looked to be in his late 60s. He had a full head of white hair, kind eyes behind wire, rimmed glasses, and a reassuring smile. He rose as she entered. "Miss Munro, I'm David Harrison. It's an honor to finally meet you. Your grandfather spoke of you often in his final months." Talia was taken aback. He did indeed," Mr. Harrison said, gesturing to a plush leather chair opposite his desk. "Please sit. Can I get you some coffee?" "Tea water would be fine." "Thank you." She managed her voice a little shaky as the assistant quietly brought her a glass of water. Talia studied the lawyer. He didn't have the predatory air of Gregory Finch. There was a gravitas about him, a sense of deep, unshakable integrity. He had been her grandfather's lawyer, his confidant. Mr. Harrison sat down and folded his hands on the desk. "I was Alistair's personal attorney for over 40 years. I was also his friend. I know this must be overwhelming for you. We haven't seen you at Seacliff since you were a little girl with pigtails chasing butterflies on the lawn." The memory was faint. A dreamlike image, a huge manicured lawn, the distant roar of the ocean, a tall, imposing man with a booming laugh who had lifted her onto his shoulders. It was hard to reconcile that faint, warm memory with the fearsome tycoon her mother had described. "My mother." Talia began, unsure of what to say. She didn't speak of him kindly. Mr. Harrison's expression softened with sympathy. Alistair was a complicated man. He was proud, stubborn. He and your mother were cut from the same cloth. I'm afraid he regretted his estrangement from her every single day after her passing, and he regretted more than anything that it cost him his relationship with you. This was a version of her grandfather she had never been allowed to know. A man capable of regret. "Why am I here, Mr. Harrison?" Talia asked, getting to the heart of the matter. "You are here for the reading of his last will and testament," he said calmly. "Alistair passed away 2 weeks ago peacefully in his sleep. As per his instructions, the reading was to be delayed until your personal affairs were settled." Her blood ran cold. "My divorce." He nodded slowly. "He was aware of your situation with Mr. Wells. He was aware of everything." The room seemed to tilt. Her grandfather, the distant billionaire, had been watching her life from afar. His strange request on the phone suddenly made a terrifying kind of sense. He hadn't just been a dying old man. He had been a chess master, moving pieces she didn't even know were on the board. Before she could process this, the door to the office opened again. 2 other people were shown in. A man and a woman, both in their 50s, dressed in expensive black. Their faces were pinched with a mixture of grief and avarice. Talia recognized them from old family photos. Her grandfather's other children, her uncle Philip, and her aunt Beatrice. They were the children who had stayed, the ones who had made suitable marriages and produced suitable heirs. Beatrix's eyes, sharp and assessing, landed on Talia. A flicker of confusion, then disdain crossed her face. "David," she said to Mr. Harrison, her voice dripping with entitlement. "What is she doing here, Philip?" A man who looked like a softer, less successful version of his father simply stared. "Is that Eleanor's girl, Talia? Mr. Harrison corrected them gently. This is your niece, Talia Monroe, and she is here at your father's explicit request. Please have a seat. They sat positioning their chairs as far from Talia as possible, creating a clear and hostile demarcation. They looked at Talia's simple dress and cloth coat with open contempt. To them she was an outsider, a commoner who had wandered into the throne room by mistake. They had no idea she was the main event. Mr. Harrison cleared his throat, the sound echoing in the tense silence. He opened a thick, leather-bound folder on his desk. We are gathered today to read the last will and testament of Alistair William Cromwell. He began his voice, taking on a formal, solemn tone. I will dispense with the usual legal preamble and proceed to the primary bequests. Philip and Beatrice leaned forward, their faces tight with anticipation. Talia felt a strange sense of detachment, as if she were watching a play. She was a spectator in a story that was impossibly about her. To my son, Philip Cromwell, and my daughter, Beatrix Cromwell Landon, Mr. Harrison read, I leave the sum of $1 million each to be held in trust. A sharp intake of breath came from Beatrice. 1 million, she hissed, her voice a furious whisper. That's an insult. The estate is worth billions. Philip looked pale, stunned into silence. Mr. Harrison continued, his voice steady, ignoring the interruption. And I do this not out of a lack of love, but out of a belief that they have already been amply provided for throughout their lives. I trust this will be sufficient for their needs. He then read through a list of smaller bequests to various staff and charities. Finally, he paused, looking over his glasses, first at Philip and Beatrice, and then with a kind, steady gaze at Talia. And now, for the remainder of my estate, he read his voice clear and deliberate, including all properties domestic and international, all stocks, bonds, and controlling interests in Cromwell Aerospace, Cromwell Technologies, and all subsidiary corporations, all art antiques and personal effects, everything of which I am possessed. I leave in its entirety to my sole and beloved granddaughter. He looked directly at Talia Monroe. For a moment, there was no sound in the room but the distant cry of a gull and the ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner. The words hung in the air, seeming to warp the very fabric of reality, sole and beloved granddaughter, in its entirety. Talia's mind went blank. It was as if her brain had simply refused to process the information, flagging it as a catastrophic error. Billions. Cromwell Aerospace. The mansion on the cliff, all of it. Hers. The $50,000 from Damon, which had felt like both a pittance and a fortune, now seemed like a cosmic joke. Then the silence was shattered. What? The word was ripped from Beatrix's throat, a strangled shriek of pure, unadulterated fury. She shot to her feet, her face a mask of crimson rage. That's impossible. It's a mistake. She's nobody. He hadn't seen her in 20 years. Philip was ash and gripping the arms of his chair. David, this has to be a forgery. Father was. He wasn't well at the end. She must have manipulated him. I can assure you, Alistair was of perfectly sound mind when he dictated and signed this will 2 months ago. Mr. Harrison said, his voice a calm and unshakable pillar in the storm of their outrage. It was witnessed by myself and 2 federal judges. It is ironclad. Beatrice rounded on Talia, her eyes blazing with a hatred so potent it was almost tangible. You conniving little snake. What did you do? Did you crawl to him when you heard he was dying? Beg for a handout from the man our mother taught you to despise. Talia, still reeling from the shock, could only stare back, speechless. The force of Beatrix's venom was stunning. This wasn't just about money. It was about legacy, about their perceived birthright being stolen by a ghost from the past. The will is clear. Beatrix Mr. Harrison interjected, his tone hardening. Alistair's instructions were precise. I'll contest it, Philip blurted out, finding his voice. We will drag this through every court in the country. We'll prove undue influence. We'll prove he was incompetent. Mr. Harrison held up a hand. I would advise against that, he said, his voice dropping to a low, serious tone. Alistair anticipated your reaction. He included a no-contest clause. Any beneficiary who challenges the will forfeits their inheritance entirely. Your $1 million trusts would be immediately dissolved and donated to the Cromwell Foundation. Checkmate. The dead man had thought of everything. Beatrix and Philip stared at him, trapped, their faces contorting with the agony of their impotence. They were being offered $1 million to swallow the loss of billions. It was Alistair Cromwell's final masterful power play. Beatrice slowly sank back into her chair, defeated. The fight drained out of her, replaced by a cold, simmering resentment. She wouldn't look at Talia, but the waves of her animosity were palpable. Talia finally found her voice, though it was barely a whisper. I don't understand. When she looked at Mr. Harrison, her eyes pleading for an explanation that could make sense of the seismic shift that had just occurred in her life. Mr. Harrison gave her a small, compassionate smile. Alistair left something for you as well. An explanation. But first, he said, turning his cool gaze back to Philip and Beatrice. I believe our business here is concluded. My assistant will be in touch regarding the administration of your trusts. It was a dismissal. Humbled and furious, Philip and Beatrice rose and left the office without another word, without a single glance at their newly crowned billionaire niece. The door clicked shut behind them, leaving a profound and ringing silence in their wake. Talia felt like she might faint. She gripped the arms of her chair, anchoring herself. Mr. Harrison, please, I need to understand. He nodded, his demeanor softening again now that they were alone. He reached into a drawer in his desk and pulled out a thick, cream-colored envelope sealed with a familiar wax essay. Her name, Talia, was written on the front in a strong, slightly shaky hand. Alistair wrote this for you about a month ago, he said, sliding it across the desk. He asked me to give it to you after the will was read. Her fingers trembled as she took it. It felt warm, as if it still held some of the life of the man who wrote it. She broke the seal and unfolded the heavy paper. My dearest Talia, the letter began. If you are reading this, then it means I am gone, and you have finally learned the truth. I imagine you are shocked, confused, and perhaps even angry. You have every right to be. The sin of pride is a terrible thing, my girl, and it cost me my daughter, and it cost me 20 years with you. That is a regret I will carry with me into eternity. I cannot ask for your forgiveness, only for your understanding. I never stopped watching over you. When your mother passed, I wanted to reach out, but I knew you had been taught to hate me. So I kept my distance, but I never stopped looking out for you. I had a private firm keep me updated. Your graduation from college, your first job at the library, your marriage to that man, Damon Wells. I knew what he was from the start. Talia, a peacock, a man in love, not with you, but with the idea of what a wife could do for him. I saw how he used your intellect to build his own success, and then when you were no longer useful to his ambition, how he began to discard you. I saw the affair with that Vance woman. I saw the cruelty, the disrespect. Every report I received was a dagger in my heart. I wanted to intervene to crush him, but I held back because I needed to know something. I needed to know if my stubborn pride had been passed down to my granddaughter. Not the foolish, destructive pride that separated me from your mother, but the other kind, the Cromwell strength, the kind that bends but does not break. When I knew my time was short, I called you. I asked you to be silent, to let him take everything, to let him humiliate you. It was the cruelest test I could devise, and I hate myself for putting you through it. I needed to see if you had the fortitude, the grace, and the dignity to endure. To see if your character was stronger than your pain, to see if you would descend to his level, or if you would rise above. You did not scream. You did not fight in the mud. You endured his cruelty with a silence that was more powerful than any shout. You passed my test, Talia. You proved you are more of a Cromwell than Philip or Beatrice ever were. They were born to wealth. You were forged by adversity. They are branches of the tree. You, my dear girl, are the root. This fortune is now yours. It is a great power and a great burden. Use it to protect yourself. Use it to build a life he could never even imagine. Use it wisely. Be happy. That is my final wish. Your loving grandfather, Alistista. Tears streamed down Talia's face, dripping onto the page. They were not tears of sadness for the man she'd lost, but tears of overwhelming, heartbreaking validation. Her suffering hadn't been meaningless. Her silence hadn't been surrender. It had been a testament, a quiet, dignified act of defiance that had been seen, understood, and rewarded by the one person in the world she never thought cared at all. She looked up at Mr. Harrison through blurry eyes. He was watching her with a gentle paternal expression. He was very proud of you, Talia, he said softly. Talia wiped her eyes, a new, unfamiliar strength settling deep in her bones. The meek librarian had been shed like a skin. The woman who sat in this office was no longer a victim. She was the sole heiress to the Cromwell Empire, and her story was just beginning. "There's more," Mr. Harrison said, his voice pulling Talia from the emotional vortex of the letter. He gestured towards a sleek, silver laptop on the corner of his desk. Alistista was meticulous. He didn't just want to reward your character, Talia. He wanted to ensure that Damon Wells received a lesson he would never forget. He called it the Wells Addendum. He swiveled the laptop to face her. On the screen was a secure digital vault. Mr. Harrison entered a complex password, and a series of folders appeared, each meticulously labeled Wells Financials. Wells Vance Affair, Visual Confirmation, Wells Project Apex Deal, Wells Character Assessment, Psych Profile. Talia stared, her heart beginning to pound with a different kind of rhythm. Not shock, but a slow, dawning sense of awe at the depth of her grandfather's menations. For the past 2 years, Mr. Harrison explained, clicking open the first folder, Alistair employed a team of top-tier private investigators, the kind of people governments use. They compiled a complete picture of Damon's life, his finances, his business dealings, his personal indiscretions. Alistista knew about every secret lunch, every hotel booking, every dollar Damon funneled into offshore accounts to hide it from you in the divorce. He opened the folder labeled Vance Affair. It contained a trove of surveillance photos and videos. Damon and Victoria in Paris, London, St. Bart's. They were kissing on balconies, laughing over candle-lit dinners, entering boutique hotels. The evidence was damning comprehensive and utterly soul-crushing. To see her husband's betrayal laid out so clinically in high resolution was a fresh wave of pain. But it was a clean pain, the kind that comes from lancing a wound. The vague suspicions and gaslit anxieties were gone, replaced by cold, hard proof. "Why?" Talia whispered, her eyes fixed on a photo of Damon placing a diamond necklace around Victoria's neck, a necklace he'd told Talia they couldn't afford as a Christmas gift for her. Because Alistista believed that men like Damon Wells don't operate in a vacuum. Mr. Harrison said, his expression grim. Their personal corruption inevitably bleeds into their professional lives. He wanted to see if your husband's character flaws presented a tangible threat, not just to you but to others. And he found it. He clicked on the folder Project Apex deal. It was filled with encrypted emails, audio recordings of phone calls, and detailed reports. Damon is on the verge of the biggest deal of his career. Harrison explained, his voice low and serious. He's courting a consortium of conservative old-money European investors led by a Swiss industrialist named Klaus Richter. RTOR is famously obsessed with character and stability. He only invests with people he perceives as solid, trustworthy family men. The entire deal, worth hundreds of millions, hinges on Damon's reputation. Talia's mind raced, connecting the dots. Damon's sudden haste to marry Victoria, his obsession with their public image, the carefully curated articles in finance magazines about them as Boston's new power couple. It was all a performance for Klaus Richter. Damon leveraged everything to get a seat at this table, Harrison continued. He likely used marital assets that were rightfully half yours as collateral to prove his liquidity. The $50,000 settlement was not just an act of cruelty, Talia. It was a calculated business move to erase you and your claims from his balance sheet before the deal closed. He needed to appear unencumbered, stable, and in full control. A bitter laugh escaped Talia's lips. It was all so clear now. She wasn't just a wife he'd fallen out of love with. She was a liability to be liquidated. What was my grandfather planning to do with all this? She asked, a cold fire starting to burn in her chest, that Mr. Harrison said with a thin smile is the genius of his plan. His initial impulse was to simply send this entire dossier to Klaus Richter and torpedo the deal to ruin him publicly. But he realized that would be his victory, not yours. So he devised a more elegant solution. He looked at her, his eyes keen. Alistista didn't change his will in the final months, Talia. This willing you everything was drafted 5 years ago, shortly after he first learned of Damon's infidelity. He was simply waiting for the right moment to die. The statement was so blunt, so shocking, that Talia could only stare. He was terminally ill for the last year, Harrison clarified gently. He knew he had a limited time, so he planned his exit with the precision of a military campaign. He instructed me to time the announcement of his death and the reading of the will for maximum impact, specifically for the week before Damon was due to sign the final papers with RTOR's consortium. The sheer breathtaking audacity of it left Talia speechless. Her grandfather had used his own death as a weapon. Think of the narrative, Talia, Mr. Harrison urged, leaning forward. Damon Wells, the rising star of finance, brutally casts aside his loyal 10-year wife, leaving her with pennies. He immediately flaunts his new life with his glamorous business partner. Then, mere weeks later, the discarded wife is revealed to be the sole heirs to the Cromwell fortune, one of the largest and most respected family fortunes in America, a fortune that makes Damon's look like pocket change. He let the words sink in. How does that make Damon look to a man like Klaus Richter? It makes him look like the worst kind of fool, a man with catastrophic judgment, a man who couldn't see the value in what he had, a man who is not shrewd, but petty and blinded by greed, a man who in his haste to grasp a few million threw away a potential alliance with billions. It completely shatters the image of the stable, savvy genius he has so carefully constructed. He won't need to see a single surveillance photo. The public record of the divorce, followed by the public record of your inheritance, is the only evidence RTR will need. Allister hasn't just exposed his affair. He has exposed his soul. Talia sat back, the scale of her grandfather's posthumous revenge settling over her. He hadn't just given her a fortune. He had given her justice served on a silver platter. He had engineered a scenario where Damon's own actions would become the instruments of his downfall. Damon would not be ruined by an anonymous tip or a shadowy enemy. He would be ruined by the woman he had so arrogantly dismissed. The press release announcing your inheritance is scheduled to go out to all major financial news outlets tomorrow at 9 a.m. Mr. Harrison stated, by 9:05, it will be the biggest story on Wall Street. By 9 to 10, Klaus Richter's phone will be ringing, and Damon Wells's world will come to an end. He closed the laptop. The dossier of evidence, the grandfather's final gambit, was now hers to command. Allister left one final instruction. Harrison said, "This information," he tapped the laptop, "is now yours. You can release it and destroy what's left of him, or you can keep it knowing that your victory is already assured." He wanted the choice to be yours, the choice between silent triumph and total annihilation. Talia looked out the window at the vast, churning Atlantic. The ocean was powerful, relentless, and unforgiving. For 10 years, she had been quiet, placid, and accommodating. But her grandfather had seen the ocean inside her. He hadn't just left her his money, he had reintroduced her to her own strength. "I'll hold on to it for now," she said, her voice steady and clear. "Let's see how Mr. Wells enjoys the morning news." Damon Wells was on top of the world. He stood on the balcony of his penthouse suite in Aspen, a glass of champagne in his hand, the crisp mountain air sharp and clean. Below him, the ski slopes were dotted with colorful figures, and the sun glinted off the snow with dazzling intensity. Victoria emerged from the suite, wrapped in a plush white robe, and draped her arms around his neck from behind. "To us?" she purred in his ear, clinking her glass against his. "To the future, Wells, Vance, and Richter. It has a nice ring to it, don't you think?" Damon smiled a genuine, triumphant smile. "The best. RTOR's final approval is just a formality. His lawyers have reviewed everything. We sign in Zurich on Friday. Project Apex is ours." He had never felt more alive, more powerful. The divorce was a distant, unpleasant memory. He'd successfully excised the dead weight from his life. Talia, with her quiet disapproval and her simple taste, had been an anchor. Victoria was a rocket engine. Everything was perfect. He had the woman, the deal, and the life he deserved. His phone buzzed on the small table beside him. He glanced at it, expecting a congratulatory text from one of his partners. Instead, he saw a flood of notifications from every major financial news outlet. The Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg, Forbes, Reuters. They all had the same headline: Secret Heiress Reclusive Billionaire. Allister Cromwell leaves entire $15 billion fortune to unknown granddaughter, Talia Monroe. Damon stared at the screen. His mind stuttered. Talia Monroe. The name was right, but the context was impossible. A glitch, a mistake, a fake news story. It had to be. He clicked on the Wall Street Journal article. His blood turned to ice. There was a photo of a young Talia from her college ID next to a stern-looking portrait of Allister Cromwell. The article detailed the shocking reading of the will, quoting sources from the prestigious Newport law firm of Harrison and Shaw. It mentioned his recent divorce, from her dryly noting the court-filed settlement of $50,000. The champagne glass slipped from his fingers and shattered on the stone balcony. "Damon, what is it?" "You look like you've seen a ghost," Victoria said, her playful tone instantly vanishing. He couldn't speak. He thrust the phone at her. She read the headline, her perfectly shaped eyebrows shooting up. She snatched the phone and began scrolling, her expression shifting from disbelief to confusion, and then to a cold, calculating horror. Cromwell, she breathed, the Cromwell. Cromwell, aerospace. That's her grandfather. Damon's mind was a maelstrom of denial and panic. It can't be. She never said a word. Her family was. She said they were estranged, that there was no money. Obviously, she lied. Victoria snapped her voice, sharp and accusatory. Or you were too stupid to ask the right questions. His phone began to ring, the name flashing on the screen. Klaus Richter. Damon's heart seized in his chest. He felt a wave of nausea. This was the call to confirm the final details for the signing in Zurich, but he knew with a gut-wrenching certainty that it wasn't. He let it go to voicemail. A moment later, it rang again and again. "Answer it, you fool!" Victoria hissed. "Don't look weak." With a trembling hand, he accepted the call and put it on speaker. Damon said the voice of Klaus Richter. It was not the warm, collegial tone from their last meeting. It was Arctic. "I have just been made aware of some startling news. Klaus, I can explain." Damon stammered his mind, scrambling for a plausible lie. "It's a complicated family matter. It has no bearing on our business." There was a dry, humorless laugh on the other end of the line. "No bearing, Mr. Wells. I build my partnerships on a foundation of character and judgment. You have in the last month divorced the AIs to one of America's great industrial fortunes. An alliance with her would have made your firm unassailable. Instead, you cast her aside for what the court documents state is the price of a mid-range sedan." "It wasn't about the money," Damon pleaded, desperation creeping into his voice. He could feel Victoria's icy stare on him. "Oh, I believe you, Richter," said his voice, dripping with contempt. "And that is precisely the problem. It was about ego. It was about poor judgment. You had a queen in your hand, Mr. Wells, and you threw her away because you thought she was a two. A man who makes a miscalculation of that magnitude in his personal life is a liability in the boardroom. The deal is off. My lawyers will be in touch." The line went dead. Silence. The magnificent view of the mountain seemed to mock him. The entire future he had been celebrating 5 minutes ago had evaporated. Victoria slowly backed away from him, her face a mask of cold fury. "You absolute imbecilic fool!" She whispered the words like shards of glass. "You didn't just lose the deal. You made us the laughingstock of the entire financial world." "Us," Damon choked out. "You were part of this. You wanted her gone as much as I did. I wanted her gone because I thought she was a nobody," Victoria shrieked, her voice rising. "I didn't know I was helping you divorce 15 billion. You told me she was nothing, that her family was nothing." His phone buzzed again. It was a text from his partner at the firm. "Board meeting now. They're calling for your resignation." Another notification popped up, an article from a gossip site. "Finance hotch shot Damon Wells's billion-dollar divorce blunder." It was happening. The edifice of his life was crumbling in real time. The reputation he had spent a decade building was being torched by the silence of the woman he had dismissed. He had seen her as a relic of footnote, but she was the whole story. He was the footnote, a cautionary tale of greed and stupidity. He looked at Victoria, at the contempt in her eyes. He saw no sympathy, no partnership. He saw the same ruthless calculation he saw in the mirror every morning. She was already assessing her own position, figuring out how to cut him loose and salvage her own brand. Their power couple image was now a toxic asset. "I'm ruined," he said, the words hollow. Victoria picked up her champagne glass, the one that hadn't shattered, and took a deliberate sip. "No, Damon," she said, her voice devoid of all warmth. "You're ruined. I, on the other hand, am a survivor." She turned and walked back into the suite, leaving him alone on the balcony with the ruins of his life. The mountain air was no longer crisp and clean. It felt thin and suffocating, like the atmosphere on a dead planet. He had erased Talia from his life, only to find that in doing so, he had erased himself. 1 month later, Talia Monroe sat at the head of the Cromwell Industries boardroom table. The quiet librarian was gone, replaced by a confident chairwoman in a tailored suit whose authority was absolute. The board, once skeptical of the unknown heiress, now watched her with profound respect. She had earned it not with her grandfather's iron fist, but with quiet intensity, incisive logic, and an unshakable moral compass that had already proven more formidable than any boardroom bluster. She demonstrated her prowess in a single masterful stroke. "As of this morning," she announced to the stunned room, "Cromwell Industries has acquired the entire R&D division of Vance Industries out of bankruptcy for pennies on the dollar." The news was a bombshell. Victoria Vance's family company, fatally wounded by the public scandal, had collapsed. Talia had turned the very drama meant to destroy her into a brilliant strategic victory, acquiring priceless technology and talent. It was a move of breathtaking acumen, proving she was more than an AI's. She was a visionary. While Damon Wells's name had become a cautionary tale on Wall Street, a punchline synonymous with catastrophic misjudgment, Talia felt no joy in his ruin, only a quiet sense of balance restored. Her first major act as head of the Cromwell Foundation was establishing a multi-billion-dollar endowment to fund public libraries and preserve historical texts. She was still saving stories just as she always had, but now she was doing it on a global scale. The silent woman had found her voice, and she was using it to build a better world. Talia Monroe's story is a powerful reminder that the world often mistakes quietness for weakness and silence for surrender. Damon Wells saw a footnote he could easily erase, but he was blind to the epic novel that was her life, her legacy, and her incredible strength. Her grandfather's final lesson wasn't just about wealth, it was about worth. He gave her the power to match the character she already possessed. From the ashes of a humiliating divorce, she didn't just rise. She built an entirely new empire, proving that the best revenge isn't a loud explosion, but a life lived magnificently. What did you think of Talia's ultimate victory? Was her grandfather's plan a stroke of genius or a cruel test? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were inspired by this story of quiet strength and incredible transformation, please hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded of their own worth. And be sure to subscribe for more unforgettable stories of justice and empowerment. Thank you for listening.